Crying has long been framed as something to control, suppress, or apologize for, as if tears are evidence of emotional failure rather than emotional depth. But psychology, neuroscience, and lived human experience paint a far more accurate and empowering picture. Crying is not weakness, it is emotional intelligence in motion, a visible expression of a nervous system that is responsive, attuned, and deeply connected to both inner experience and the social world. And people who cry easily are often those who feel deeply, process honestly, and engage with life at a level many others unconsciously avoid. Emotional intelligence begins with awareness, the ability to recognize emotions as they arise, and people who cry easily often have a remarkably low barrier between feeling and awareness, meaning they notice emotional shifts in real time rather than hours or days later. And when emotion is recognized quickly, it has somewhere to go, which is why tears emerge as a natural outlet rather than being buried and converted into anxiety, irritability, numbness, or physical tension. Crying is the body's way of saying something matters, and individuals who cry easily are often those whose internal signaling system is functioning exactly as it should, alerting them to moments of loss, beauty, empathy, overwhelm, gratitude, or meaning before those moments calcify into unprocessed stress. From a neurological perspective, emotional tears are distinct from reflex tears, containing stress hormones and neurochemicals that are released during emotional arousal, which means crying is not just symbolic but biochemical regulation, a mechanism that helps the brain return to equilibrium. And people who cry easily are often people whose nervous systems favor release over repression, expression over denial, and honesty over performance. Emotional intelligence is not about appearing calm at all costs, but about responding appropriately to emotional information, and tears are often an appropriate response to complex human realities like grief, love, injustice, or connection, even though modern culture, particularly productivity-driven and hyper-rational environments, often rewards emotional detachment while quietly punishing authenticity. Many people who cry easily were once told they were too sensitive, yet sensitivity in psychological terms is not fragility, but depth of processing, meaning the brain takes in more information, reflects on it more thoroughly, and responds more strongly, which is why highly sensitive individuals often excel in empathy, creativity, moral reasoning, and relational insight, even if they struggle in environments that equate stoicism with strength. Crying easily is frequently linked to high empathy, the ability to emotionally resonate with others, and when someone cries at another person's pain, joy, or vulnerability, it reflects mirror neuron systems that are active and responsive, allowing them to feel with others rather than merely understand them intellectually. And this capacity for emotional resonance is foundational to healthy relationships, effective leadership, caregiving, and conflict resolution, because people who can feel emotions are better equipped to respond to them with compassion and nuance. Tears also function as social communication, signaling need, sincerity, and openness. And while this vulnerability can feel risky in a world that often exploits openness, it also builds trust and connection when met with safety, because crying lowers defenses and invites authenticity on both sides, creating emotional intimacy that words alone cannot achieve. Emotional intelligence involves regulation, not suppression, and regulation means allowing emotions to rise and fall without becoming overwhelming or destructive, and crying is often part of that regulatory cycle, a release that allows individuals to move through emotion rather than getting stuck in it, contrary to the myth that crying makes emotions last longer, as research suggests that emotional expression, when not shamed, actually shortens the duration of distress and accelerates recovery. People who cry easily often have less emotional avoidance, meaning they are more willing to sit with discomfort, sadness, or tenderness, rather than immediately distracting themselves, numbing out, or intellectualizing. And this willingness to feel is what allows for genuine healing, because emotions that are allowed to be felt tend to resolve, while emotions that are avoided tend to resurface in indirect and often harmful ways. Many chronic stress-related issues, burnout, emotional numbness, resentment, anxiety, are linked not to feeling too much, but to feeling too little for too long. And people who cry easily may actually be protecting their mental health by letting emotions move through them instead of storing them in the body. Cultural and gender norms play a significant role in how crying is perceived, with men especially being taught that tears signal weakness or loss of control. Yet studies consistently show that emotional suppression is associated with higher rates of depression, cardiovascular stress, and relational difficulties, suggesting that what society labels as strength often comes at a psychological cost, while those who allow themselves to cry are engaging in a more sustainable form of emotional self-care. Crying easily can also reflect strong values, because tears often emerge when something violates or affirms what a person deeply cares about, whether it's fairness, love, connection, or meaning. And this alignment between values and emotional response is a hallmark of emotional intelligence, as it indicates that emotions are not random but informative, guiding behavior and decision-making in ways that are consistent with one's inner compass. Emotionally intelligent individuals do not aim to eliminate emotion, but to understand it, and tears are often the first clue in that process, signaling that something needs attention, reflection, or care. And when people listen to their tears rather than judging them, they often gain insight into unmet needs, unresolved grief, or deeply held desires that might otherwise remain hidden. Crying easily is also linked to authenticity, the ability to show up as one truly is, rather than performing emotional neutrality for approval. And while authenticity can invite criticism, it also attracts deeper connections and self-respect, because living in alignment with one's emotional truth reduces internal conflict and the exhaustion of constant self-monitoring. From a developmental perspective, many people who cry easily learned early on that emotions were safe to express, or conversely, they may have learned to cry as a survival mechanism in environments where emotional attunement was inconsistent. But in adulthood, this capacity for emotional expression can be refined into a powerful tool for self-awareness and relational clarity, rather than something to be unlearned. Emotional intelligence includes the capacity to recover, and crying often marks the turning point between emotional overload and emotional integration, the moment when tension breaks and clarity begins, which is why many people report feeling lighter, clearer, or calmer after crying, not because the problem disappeared, but because the emotional energy surrounding it was released. People who cry easily often feel deeply moved by beauty, music, art, nature, human kindness, and this responsiveness to beauty is another dimension of emotional intelligence, reflecting an openness to awe and meaning that enhances life satisfaction and resilience, as moments of beauty can buffer stress and restore a sense of connection to something larger than oneself. Despite this, easy criers are frequently encouraged to toughen up, as if emotional permeability were a flaw rather than a gift. Yet toughness without tenderness often leads to rigidity, while sensitivity paired with self-awareness leads to adaptability. And adaptability, not hardness, is what allows humans to thrive in complex emotional landscapes. Emotional intelligence is not about crying all the time or being overwhelmed by emotion, but about having a healthy relationship with emotion. And for many people, crying is simply one of the ways that relationship expresses itself, especially during moments of intensity or transition. It is also important to distinguish crying from emotional dysregulation, as crying does not mean lack of control, and many people who cry easily are still capable of making thoughtful decisions, setting boundaries, and functioning effectively, because emotional expression and cognitive competence are not opposites but complementary processes within a well-integrated mind. In fact, suppressing tears often consume cognitive resources, reducing clarity and increasing stress, while allowing tears can free mental energy for problem-solving and perspective-taking. Crying easily can also reflect strong self-compassion, the ability to respond to one's own pain with care rather than judgment, and self-compassion is a key predictor of mental health, resilience, and motivation, far more so than self-criticism or emotional hardness. When people view their tears as information rather than embarrassment, they often develop greater emotional literacy, learning to name, understand, and respond to feelings in themselves and others with nuance, which enhances communication and reduces conflict. Emotional intelligence in action means knowing when to speak, when to listen, when to act, and when to feel. And tears often arrive in those moments when feeling is the most honest and human response available. In relationships, people who cry easily often bring emotional transparency, which can be challenging for partners who are less comfortable with emotion. But when met with mutual respect, this transparency deepens intimacy and trust, as it creates a space where emotions are not hidden or weaponized, but shared and understood. In professional context, crying has been unfairly stigmatized, yet leaders who can acknowledge emotion without being ruled by it often create healthier, more engaged teams because emotional awareness allows for better conflict management, motivation, and ethical decision-making. Crying easily does not mean lacking boundaries, and emotionally intelligent individuals learn over time when and where vulnerability is safe, refining their expression without denying it, much like learning to speak honestly and when to pause, rather than silencing oneself entirely. The problem is not tears, but the environments that refuse to accommodate human emotion, and when society pathologizes crying, it often rewards emotional disconnection, which may look like strength, but often masks burnout.